Thank you so much for that introduction. It's actually my second time back at Wisdom 2.0, and it seems like this conference gets better every year. So I have to thank Soren for giving me an opportunity to talk to you today. When he asked me to speak about applied wisdom in business life, I kind of, it was hard for me to figure out where to begin to tackle such a complex topic. From my experience, though, business leadership is really about executing on the small details while really not losing focus and placing big bets toward the longer vision. And it's the ability to do both that makes for successful leadership in business and in life, I actually think. So to put it another way, it's really about mastering the small steps while focusing on the big leaps. So obviously, when you think about small steps and big leaps, typically they refer to disparities in a spatial context. So today, what I want to do is to kind of extend that analogy to disparate forces or opposite pulls that we all face as we think about our life and especially for success in business. And so what do I mean by that? It's a sort of the challenge we all have as human beings on being able to be present and make the decisions in the moment without losing sight of the bigger picture or the end goal. And this is something that you have to do in business as well, pretty much every day. You're making decisions every day, but you still need to know what's the longer-term vision for the company, and especially in a technology company, when things are changing so rapidly, it becomes an extreme challenge. So that's really what I want to talk about. I think from my experience, having been in the industry, in the technology industry for over 2 decades, and having a career in various parts of the tech industry, while raising a family, while being a mom, a wife, and a friend, and especially as a woman in technology, I think there are additional pressures that we face, even from the social aspects. And my learning is really about how do you bring these disparate forces or seemingly disparate pulls together. And I find that I'm actually better as a leader and as a human being when I'm able to bring together and focus both on the analytical side, but on the creativity as well, or on the creative side as well, and bringing together decisiveness with thoughtfulness. And I think that's really what Ev was talking about. It's how do you be mindful while you're making decisions? Because usually decisiveness or being decisive is associated with being ruthless. And how do you balance that? And then thirdly, how do you bring work and family together? And I often say I don't like the word balance, especially with respect to work and family, because to me balance suggests somehow these are never going to be in harmony, and I don't subscribe to that theory. So I like to think of these 3 things as an integration. How do you integrate being analytical with being creative? How do you integrate being decisive with being thoughtful? And how do you integrate your work with your family? So those are the 3 principles that I would like to talk about today. And I'm going to watch the time here, and if I have time, I would love to take some questions. So with that, as I'm talking, I want to show you some of my paintings and my poetry and my photographs in the background. I just want to say up front that I've had 0 formal training in photography or in art or in poetry. So if there are professionals in this field, I would love for you to indulge me as a student of the arts. But I think really what I want to emphasize, the first principle I want to talk about is bringing together creativity with the analytics. And, this is not a new concept. Actually, in the academic world, there's been a lot of research that's been done around the intersection of art and science and the value at that intersection. Actually, now there are a lot of universities, leading universities, especially in the US, but around the world, that offer formal curriculum that bring together the arts and science and technology. And I just want to give you a few examples. Arizona State University offers a course in engineering that brings together media, technology, and arts. And Stanford actually has a program with an MFA and MS that brings together mechanical engineering with art and art history. And the idea is that to design a product, you really need to understand the artistic implications or the usability of that product. Similarly, both UC Davis and UC Santa Barbara offer courses in engineering, science, and co-host programs with media, arts, and technology. So in the academic world, this intersection of art and science has been proven to create incremental or dramatically incremental value compared to just having these disciplines as being siloed. However, the same is not true within the fields of business and creativity or business and art. And I think this is just an emerging concept. And I feel that in the future there's a lot more value that we can harness if we are able to bring this together. And there's actually an article that I read about 2 years ago in the February issue of The Economist, 2011. It's called The Art of Management, written by Schumpeter, and I'd really recommend, if you haven't read it, to read it. It's a short article. It's very funny and it's easy to read. But in that, Schumpeter really brings the issue to the table and talks about, in management schools or in business schools, we are taught to look at hard data and use cases. Right? And that notion carries over into the business world. And he calls it, in the business world, there's a saying that it doesn't count if you can't count. Right? So it's supposed to be all about, it's an analytical pursuit, it's competitive, it's all about numbers, it's all about spreadsheets, and really the human aspect is not explored at all in business. And he argues that there is fallacy, and that actually limits us in how effective we can be as business leaders. And I totally believe that. And I believe that from my own experience. I run technology and business strategy for Cisco. I run all of our M&A portfolio or an investment portfolio. And if you know, Cisco is a leading technology company. We are looking at startups all the time. So a big part of my job is the analysis and the data. However, I find that I'm actually able to bring a better perspective, especially for the strategy portion of it, if I step back and immerse myself in art or literature or poetry. And that is because it gives you a different perspective in how to look at problems in a different way. And by the way, this is now beginning to become a formal science. There is a science emerging and a field emerging called visualization. That actually, because we're in a world where there's so much data, and data is becoming more of a burden than a useful factor for us, we're now beginning to think about how do we represent this data so that we look for patterns within data. So there's an emerging field around visualization with informatics, where there are artists, designers, computer scientists, and data scientists working together to extract value from data. And I think in the next couple of years, we'll see this become much more useful in business, and we will recognize then that business really can benefit from the arts and being present. The second way I find that actually being mindful and thoughtful helps me be a better business leader is in the field of innovation. One of the things that's happened because of the emergence of the internet and the mobile is we can now isolate ourselves. And I think Ev was talking about I don't want to deal with the people, I just want to write software and create the product. Well, that's, I think we all go through that. However, now we are recognizing that the product is more efficient if you bring the marketing people, the engineers together, and that old model of having these people co-locate is gone away with technology. Now we've come all the way around, and we're beginning to develop technologies as collaboration platforms where people can collaborate. And Cisco obviously does this. We use video technology a lot to enable our engineers and designers and marketing people to work together, although they may be distributed globally. So I think this is another area where figuring out the people dynamics and how to develop technology so that people can actually collaborate in a more natural way. Because in a way, text communication is a very unnatural form of communication, right? I mean, we had to create emoticons just to express emotion in text messaging, if you think about it. And the most natural way is just to talk. And, visual communication is the most natural way for us as human beings to communicate. And so now we've sort of come all the way around, and I believe that video will play a big role in bringing collaboration and innovation, where the human aspects of collaboration is as important as the business aspects of collaboration. And the third thing is I feel leaders can communicate much more effectively by studying literature and exploring concepts of how words can be interpreted differently. The same word said a different way or used in a different context can have massive repercussions. And when you're leading organizations, Cisco has over 60,000 people worldwide. What you say and what you intended can get completely diluted by the time it goes across geographical boundaries and language boundaries. And I think by focusing on crisply communicating messages is really useful. And I think I find a lot, actually Twitter helps me a lot because it forces you to communicate what you want to say in 140 characters. So I've actually started to use that as a platform now to get ideas. And I actually write poetry on Twitter. I write haikus on Twitter, and I want to show you a few of these. So this is a haiku or a paiku that I wrote on something called a pi day. Pi, as you know, is a mathematical concept, and there is, if you're a geek, there is something called a pi day where all geeks get together and celebrate the value of pi. So I decided to do this in a poetic format, and so this is a haiku that I wrote on Twitter. And what you see in the background is one of my paintings or artworks. So this is an example of how I feel I can communicate the power of math and what numbers teach us through art and through poetry. I want to show you another haiku I wrote. And this was something I was going for a walk, and sometimes it helps me clear my thoughts and be more crisp about the decisions I have to make when I'm walking. And I was walking along and I saw this little lizard that cut across my way, and I jumped and the lizard darted away, and it was sort of interesting on who was more startled. So I wrote this little haiku to do that. I took this picture with my iPhone and I tweeted it. And so this is a spontaneous way where when you see things in your life, and it's a simple thing, you're going for a walk, your lizard darts by. But I think it sort of conveyed to me the power of sometimes when we're under stress. I think we talked in the earlier session about the decisions you make under fear versus the decisions you make with aspiration. When you're startled, I think you sometimes have to step back and say, is the fear more your fear, or perhaps the person on the other side is more fearful? And how do you deal with this? And this comes to my second principle, which is about being decisive and thoughtful. I think it sort of like made this point really clear to me as I had to make some tough decisions that day, and I was stressed about my perspective. And this image of the lizard darting back taught me that perhaps the other person maybe is going to be as fearful as our startle. So perhaps I need to communicate this decision in a different way. And I want to show you one more haiku. This is a carving that I did on a clay plate. And I think this is something that reminds me, I meditate every day. And the reason I do that is what I was saying. I think the small moments in our life, the decisions we make every day add up to something bigger. And I think the something bigger is really being here and leaving a legacy, and legacy as a leader or a contributor to the community or to your family. And so I wrote this haiku to sort of remind myself of that and why that's important. So that's my first principle. I think really the applied wisdom I would share is combining the creativity, your creative self, with your analytical self. The second principle I want to share around this topic is being decisive while being thoughtful. And I kind of said this people that are decisive are usually thought of as being ruthless or reckless. You're making quick decisions, you're thinking on your feet, and people who are thoughtful are considered to be slow and stodgy and perhaps not being able to move as quickly. That's very true in the tech world. I think you're considered to be a hero if you just walk in with a decision and walk away, right? And I think the opposite is in fact true. You do have to make decisions, and if you're an indecisive leader, or if you're passive aggressive, sometimes being direct with people is probably more important than being evasive. And especially in the times of uncertainty, this is extremely important. And how you communicate those decisions is where being mindful and thoughtful plays a huge role. And I think this is something I learned the hard way. As we were making some organizational changes at Cisco, I was running engineering. I had 20,000 engineers with my partner. Two of us were leading our engineering team, and we were going through some major reorganizations in the company that needed to be done. In retrospect, we should have taken perhaps more time in how we communicate those decisions. That was as important as making the decision itself. If you don't communicate it, people think it's just reorganization for the sake of reorganization, or they're confused about the ultimate purpose. And I think this is really something that I would encourage all of us as you make decisions, because if you're indecisive, the organization stagnates and you paralyze motion. However, those decisions have to be communicated with a clear purpose and an explanation. The small step we are taking today leads to a big leap sometime in the future. So that's the second principle. By the way, Winston Churchill probably is, in historical context, is a perfect example of this, right? He's thought of as somebody who never shirked away from making tough decisions, but he was never reckless. It was always in the context of humanity and human life. And but I don't know if you know this, he was also an artist, and he won in 1953 the Nobel Prize for Literature. We never think of Winston Churchill as being creative as an artist, right? Because I think businesses start off as an analytical, data-driven pursuit, and art is thought of as intellectual and creative and emotive pursuit. And I definitely think there is an opportunity to bring those two together as well. And the third principle that I want to leave you with is how we all integrate work and family. And I started off by saying I actually don't like the word work-life balance because that somehow suggests that they're always going to be pulling you in completely opposite directions. And so, this is something I learned as well. I came to the United States as a student from India and went to graduate school and started working as an engineer. And I was in the semiconductor industry running a fab when my son was born. And I went through the normal trauma that every parent goes through when you're trying to raise a child and keep a technical factory essentially running 7 days a week. What I realized at that time was that it's really not the decision you make, because we all make decisions every day. You make a decision on a particular day, your baby's not well and you have to be at work, and you may decide to leave the baby with a caregiver and go to work that day, or vice versa. Whatever the decision is probably the right decision that you have made yourself, and that really in itself doesn't cause stress. What causes stress is the guilt associated with that decision. And this was definitely true for me. In my own example, I was raising my child. I would always feel guilty for being at work and missing the small things in his life. I would come home and the babysitter would tell me, he smiled today, or he started crawling today, and I would gosh, I missed that. So I would bring my work home, and I would try to work from home. And then I would feel guilty because people at work thought I was shirking, or I was missing some big customer meeting, and I missed a big contract that was signed today, and I wasn't at work because I was with my baby. So then I realized, okay, I will not worry about that. I will just spend my time with my son and work from home. Luckily, the company I worked for gave me that flexibility. And by the way, it's much harder when you're starting in your career than now. Now I'm at a position where I can get some flexibility with my work schedule. But if you're starting early in your career and you have to integrate both these, it's much harder. But luckily I was doing that. But working at home, taking care of my baby, I was guilty again that I wasn't in the gym working out looking like a supermodel. And so that's when I kind of realized, you know what, it's really not the decision, because at the end of the day, you're deciding whatever you feel is the best. But it's all of this guilt that surrounds those decisions that causes stress. And so what I learned is the best way to do this is to integrate your work and your family with your community and yourself. Because what eventually ends up happening when you're trying to bring all these together is neglect yourself. And I think if you neglect yourself, that's when you are not effective at being good at any of the above. And actually, it was that time I started to teach myself how to meditate. And in the beginning, I couldn't focus or be silent or turn things off for more than 2 minutes. Now I'm happy to, now my son is 19 now, and so now I'm able to meditate for 20 minutes a day. And, it took me almost 20 years to get to that 20-minute period. And so it's sort of like, that's really what I believe in. Truly, balance doesn't mean you're going to spend equal hours of every living moment in distributing your time across these 4 things. There will be days you will sacrifice being with your family because work calls, and there'll be other times you'll sacrifice things at work because your family calls. There'll be a third day that you'll ignore both those to take care of yourself. And I think these are all important things. And I tell people, make the decision that's right for you and go with it and not feel guilty about that. So those are the things. I can keep going on, but I thought I would just share those 3 as my applied principles in business life. I think we have about 5 minutes more, so I'm happy to take any questions that you have. It's hard to see, so maybe if we can bring the lights up, I can see who's asking the questions.
You mentioned in your talk you also have a 19-year-old son. I've got an 18-year-old son as well. I'm just curious in terms of how do you impart any of this upon your son, or is he just sort of picking up some of this by observation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I think a lot of it they take from observation. It was actually funny, and I have a funny story to tell. I was recently placed by Forbes in their powerful women's list, and my son usually never pays attention to that. For him, I'm mom and I make pasta, and that's really all that matters. But it was really interesting that he posted on his Facebook page, hey, my mom is now number X so-and-so on the Forbes Most Powerful Women. And 12 girls who are friends of his liked it. And I thought, so I don't know whether he did it for what reason or what motivation. But that was very moving for me, because it made up for all the nights I cried myself to sleep when I was missing something important in his life. And prioritizing work because I had to. So I think, my feeling is that definitely they become more independent and they learn by observing. He's a very good cook. He can help himself. He's very self-sufficient. I think he also respects women in a different way. Perhaps if he didn't have that environment where he was growing up in. So my view is that it's partly how you interact and partly how they observe and learn that.
Padma, I was intrigued to hear that you oversee the M&A for.
There are some moments
has a long history of being
when
good at
words
that.
Are really unnecessary.
How does what you've been talking about affect the way you make decisions? Because those decisions are really tricky.
Yes.
And they're complicated. And I'm just wondering how you think about how this helps you, if it does.
Yeah, it's a great question. And in the M&A world, it's also cyclical. When there's a deal, you work a lot, and and then you step back. For me, I always insist in this context that the M&A has to fit towards a strategy. Where does this acquisition fit in the strategic framework that we are developing for the company, in what the company will be in the next 5 years? And I always tie that 5-year vision with a 3-year long-range plan to what we are acquiring today. And I think that's really important. The other aspect is the talent, the people part of it, sort of making sure, the principles that we use at Cisco when we make acquisitions is Firstly, there's a common vision between the company that we're acquiring and us, and so that's the longer term view, and this is what I was talking earlier about the big leap, right? You're making a big investment to drive the company to take a big leap in the future, and the company we're acquiring has to have a similar vision. Second thing we look for is market transitions and customer centricity, and so the markets are changing rapidly. So understanding how that change is going to affect our business today is really important, and this also goes back to the longer term. And the third thing is the talent and the people and the people aspects of it. And I think culturally, the cultural aspects of this is extremely important. And we've now begun to bring in our human resources team early into the integration process versus after the fact. So those are some of the things that we do.
Hi. I want to ask you, as a leader in a technology company, how do you think technology helps or doesn't help in your team performance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for me, technology is a tool. It's an enabler, right? Yeah, somebody made a comment. I was at a conference the other day, and somebody said, well, people build robots, and so we can't forget that. And so technology is a tool. I think for us, we use technology a lot. Within Cisco, we have a collaboration platform. We use video a lot to bring people together. We create technology platforms where it's easy for people to collaborate in a normal way, right? With mobility versus just sitting at your desk, and more the mobile's becoming a platform. So all of those. But I think at the same time, you can't strictly, and this is the analytical versus the creative part. Technology suggests patterns, but it's you as a human being that have to make the inferences from those patterns, right? So if you strictly are looking at a spreadsheet and making decisions purely on the basis of the spreadsheet without taking into account the implications of the talent, will that be, even in M&A, right? Will that culturally fit within the culture of our company? So I would definitely say Cisco's culture is very much technology driven, but we balance that with the cultural aspects and the people aspects and the diversity, people that have different points of view. How do they speak up? I think that's how we do it.
Hi, I so appreciated your presentation. Thank you so much. This is more of a comment than a question, and it refers to what you were talking about earlier about when your child was born, missing that first crawl, etc. And this is such an extraordinary pressure and really pain for so many mothers as well as fathers. And one of the things that you said was this relates more to women who are starting, because women who are starting in their careers are more likely to be in their childbearing, having their children, etc. You probably know that the United States is one of only 3 countries out of 178 countries where we do not have mandated paid maternity leave, much less paternity. And I just want to comment that given your feelings about this and your experience about this, someone like yourself and women like yourself, because it has been the business community that has fought this, and for someone like yourself, who obviously has all the business credentials in the world, if you end up feeling that this is something the United States should have, for the very reasons you said, you and women like yourself could make such a difference, even an article, an op-ed piece. So I hope that you will simply think about that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I hope you'll do that too. Go to vday.org and support their legislation, Stop Violence Against Women. So I'm one of the founders of CoupleWise.com, and we're developing technology to help couples be more mindful and basically learn how to love each other better and be loved better, which is what technology should be used for. And so I'm wondering, with your experience with dealing with conflict in your own, without being too vulnerable here, as vulnerable as you feel like being, what you've learned from your corporate life in dealing with conflict between colleagues that you found helpful to apply to your couple life, and or vice versa.
So conflict, how do I deal with conflicts?
Yeah.
So my job is all about conflict resolution. Nobody invites me to come to a meeting when everybody's happy and getting along. I wish they would, but they don't. I think it's all about when there's different points of view, how do you get the team to focus on what the end goal is?
Marriage is much about that too.
Right? So that's what I do. And I think, what I tend to do is that I think someone said is it good for the company? Is it going to affect us the right way or the wrong way? I think this is why having a vision and clear values of what the company is all about and the culture of the company is all about, or your customer is all about, is extremely important. And there'll always be different points of view. That's why we are human beings, because we tend to look at things with different perspectives, and that's important. You don't want to have everyone programmed to think the same way, or you'll never get, innovation, in my opinion. But the key is to just say, okay, I hear both points of view, and then we say, this is where we are trying to go to as a company, or with your family, there's an end goal, or in your partnership, there's an end goal that you're trying to accomplish. And you then say, is the perspective irresolutely different? In that case, somebody makes a call and the other person adjusts. Or is there something you can take the best out of both ideas and combine it? And, there's no black and white. And sometimes I try to take the best of two people's points of view and reconcile it. And sometimes I just say, this is where we're going to go, therefore you have to compromise your position in this situation. But the important thing is, though, that you make sure that people are truly agreeing with the decision that was made, both intellectually and emotionally. Because oftentimes people will nod their head and then go back and do what they think their first point of view was. And that's, I refer to this as being passive-aggressive. Happens a lot in big companies and small companies, where as human beings we avoid conflict, so we'll just say, yeah, fine, and then, you know what, I'm just going to go do my thing with my team. That's something I always call if I see that happening. We agreed to this. I know you, in the beginning, had a different point of view, but this is what we agreed to as a team, and I want to have a commitment, both intellectually and emotionally, that you'll support this and you'll convince your team to move forward. So I think that feedback loop in making sure what was agreed to in the conflict resolution is actually what's getting implemented is extremely important.
So no empathy technology yet?
No empathy technology. If you have one, I would love to learn more about yours. I think probably this will be the last question, otherwise Soren won't ask me to come back next time.
So Padmasree, you said it took you 20 years to sit 20 minutes. Any tips for us so we don't have to spend another 20 years to figure that out?
Yeah, I don't. You should ask people that are professionals at teaching meditation that question. I think for me what was really hard is to get to a point where I am truly focusing on the here and now, because there would always be, my brain would always be thinking about, gee, didn't make that phone call, or I have an email. What I do now is actually Saturdays is my time for the other things. I paint, I write poetry, etc. And I try to stay away from the pure analytical aspects of my job. And so I think you have to literally force yourself and find the time and the space to do that. For me, I meditate in the night, and I know most people say, well, it's better if you do it in the morning, but I cannot, with my schedule, make the time in the morning. But at night, it's easier for me. So whatever works for you, I think having a specific space and a time, and by the way, it doesn't mean place, right? Because I travel a lot for work, so I can't always be at home in the same room meditating. So if I'm traveling and if I'm at a hotel room, there's a space that I create for myself that helps. So those would be my tips, but again, I am so not a professional in this field, so please seek help from somebody else. Thank you. Thank you.